Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Tonight we are diving into something that has always carried a strange mix of peace and danger. Hiking. Being out in nature can be freeing, beautiful, even healing, but it can also turn into a nightmare faster than you think. These are 3 true hiking horror stories from people who went out to enjoy the wilderness and barely made it back. So sit back, turn off the lights, and listen closely, because sometimes the woods are not as empty as they seem. Story 1. The man on the ridge. It was late spring of 2019 when I decided to go hiking alone in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. I had just gone through a messy breakup, and I needed time away from everyone. No texts, no calls, just quiet trails and my own thoughts. I had hiked these mountains a few times before, but this time I picked a lesser-known path, Ridgeway Trail, a narrow, twisting route that was said to lead to an abandoned fire lookout tower from the 1940s. The hike was about 8 miles up, mostly steep, with thick forests on both sides. I parked my car near the trailhead around 3 p.m., packed some snacks, a flashlight, and a small tent just in case I decided to stay overnight. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, a light breeze, and the faint sound of birds echoing through the valley. For the first hour, it was peaceful. Just the sound of crunching leaves beneath my boots and the distant chirping of crickets. I remember stopping a few times to take pictures of the sunlight filtering through the trees. It looked like something out of a painting. But as the trail got steeper, the forest seemed to grow quieter. The birds stopped singing. Even the wind felt still. It was subtle at first, but the air felt different, heavy. Like I was being watched. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But after another 30 minutes, I noticed something strange. Boot prints. They were not mine. And they were fresh. They looked like heavy work boots, the kind used by loggers or rangers, but the weird part was, they were heading the same direction I was. The deeper I went, the more I noticed them. And after a while, I saw that some prints looked distorted, like whoever made them had been dragging one foot. Still, I tried not to overthink it. It was a public trail after all. But then I started to find other things. Signs that made me feel genuinely uneasy. A torn blue flannel shirt caught on a branch. A small pile of cigarette butts in the dirt, still smelling faintly of smoke. And once, when I stopped to drink water, I swear I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate crunches of gravel and leaves. When I turned around, nothing, just the trees. Still, quiet, staring. I told myself maybe it was a deer or some animal, but the sound had been too heavy. Too human. I started hiking faster. By the time I reached the old fire lookout tower, the sun was setting behind the ridge. The structure was barely standing. Rusted metal, splintered wood, and a broken staircase winding up to a small platform. I climbed it anyway. The view was incredible. Rolling hills fading into a deep orange sky. I sat there for a few minutes, letting the wind cool my face. For the first time all day, I felt calm again. That's when I noticed movement in the trees below. At first I thought it was an animal, a bear maybe, but then I saw it clearly. A man. He was standing at the base of the tower, maybe 50 feet away, staring straight up at me. He wore a dark green jacket, torn jeans, and a backpack. His hair looked greasy and his face was half in shadow. He was not moving, not calling out, just standing there. I called down to him, "Hey, are you all right?" No response. I shouted again, "You need help?" Still nothing. That's when it hit me. He was standing completely still, his head tilted just slightly, like he was studying me. My stomach dropped. I climbed halfway down the tower, trying to get a better look. But when I reached the bottom, he was gone. No footsteps, no sound. Just gone. I stood there for a full minute, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Maybe my mind was playing tricks in the fading light. But then I heard it, Minta, from somewhere in the trees behind me. The sound of branches snapping, slow, heavy steps. I turned, but there was nothing. That's when I decided to leave. I packed up my bag and started hiking down as fast as I could, flashlight in hand. The trail looked different in the dark, all shadows and silhouettes. Every few minutes I would hear movement behind me, the faint crunch of leaves, then silence. It felt like whoever that man was, he was keeping just far enough behind to stay out of sight. I tried calling out again, my voice shaking. "Who's there?" No answer, just wind. The next hour was pure panic. My flashlight beam kept flicking across the trees, and I swore I saw shapes darting behind them. Glimpses of a jacket or a pale face. At one point, I heard breathing. Right behind me, I spun around so fast I nearly fell, but again there was nothing. Just the sound of the forest closing in. I ran the last mile down that trail. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I did not stop until I saw the faint reflection of my car headlights through the trees. When I finally reached the parking lot, I froze. There were footprints, muddy, heavy boot prints, leading from the trail to my car. And next to the driver's side door, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a cigarette butt still warm. I jumped in the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. My headlights swept across the tree line, and for a split second I saw him, that same man in the green jacket standing between the trees, staring straight at me. He did not move. Did not chase. He just stood there watching as I drove away. I reported it to the ranger station the next day. They said Ridgeway Trail had been closed a few months earlier because of unreported activity. They never clarified what that meant. But one ranger pulled me aside and said quietly, "You did the right thing leaving before dark. There's been someone out there for a while. People see him, but no one ever gets close enough to talk. To this day, I do not know who that man was or what he wanted, but sometimes when I hike new trails alone, I still feel it. That same heavy silence. That same feeling of being watched, and every time I turn around, part of me expects to see him again, standing on the ridge, just watching." Story 2, The Cabin on Eagle Peak. I have always loved hiking. Not just the fresh air or the sound of the wind moving through the trees, but the silence. That peaceful kind of silence you can only find deep in the woods. But in the summer of 2020, I learned that silence can also be terrifying. It started as a simple weekend trip with my cousin, Adam. We both lived in Oregon, and we had planned to hike Eagle Peak, a long, winding trail in the Mount Hood National Forest. It was supposed to be a 2-day hike with 1 night of camping. We arrived early Saturday morning, parked near the base of the trail, and started the climb around 8 a.m. The air was cool, and the forest looked like something out of a postcard. Tall evergreens, damp moss covering the ground, sunlight flickering through the branches. For the first few hours, everything was normal. We joked, took pictures, even played music from Adam's phone. But as the day went on, we noticed something strange. We had not seen a single other hiker, not one. Eagle Peak was not a hidden trail. It was fairly well known, so the emptiness felt wrong. At one point, we stopped for water, and I remember Adam saying quietly, "Do you hear that?" At first, I thought he meant animals or wind. But when I listened, I realized what he meant. There was nothing, no birds, no rustling leaves, not even the hum of insects. Just dead, heavy silence. It was unsettling. But we shrugged it off and kept going. By evening, the sun was dropping behind the ridge, and we decided to set up camp before it got too dark. We found a small clearing just off the trail, surrounded by thick pines. The air smelled like pine sap and wet earth. We built a small fire, ate, and talked for a while. When night came, the temperature dropped fast. We both got into our sleeping bags inside the tent with the faint sound of firewood crackling outside. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. At first, I did not know why, maybe a dream, maybe the cold. But then I heard something. Footsteps, they were slow, soft, moving around our tent. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer. But the steps were too steady, too human. I nudged Adam awake. "Hey, do you hear that?" We both listened. The sound circled the tent once, then stopped. "Silence," I whispered. "Hello?" No response. Then, after a few seconds, we heard it again. But this time it was further away, like whoever it was had started walking into the trees. Adam grabbed the flashlight and unzipped the tent. He shined the beam across the clearing, and for a moment we saw nothing. Then the light passed over something about 20 feet away. A figure, someone standing behind a tree. The beam caught just enough to see a shoulder and a piece of fabric, maybe a jacket. Before it disappeared, Adam shouted, "Hey!" "Who's there?" No answer. We waited frozen, scanning the trees. But whoever it was had already vanished into the woods. After a few minutes, Adam said it was probably another hiker messing with us. We decided to pack up and move further down the trail. By the time we found a new spot, it was almost 2 a.m. We set up again quickly, but neither of us could sleep. Every sound, every creak or gust of wind bar made us jump. The next morning, we continued up toward Eagle Peak. We tried to laugh about it, but the mood was different now. Tense, quiet. Neither of us said it, but I could tell we both felt watched. Around noon, we came across something unexpected. A cabin. It sat about 100 feet off the trail, tucked between the trees. It looked old, really old, but surprisingly intact. The roof was covered in moss, the wooden porch half collapsed, and the windows dark. There was no sign of smoke or people, but I swear I felt that same heaviness again, like the air itself was warning us to stay away. Adam, being the curious one, wanted to take a look. I hesitated but followed. The door was slightly open. He pushed it gently and it creaked like something straight out of a horror movie. Inside, it was dark and smelled like rot. There was a small table, 2 chairs, and an old cast-iron stove. A few tools were hanging on the wall, a saw, an axe, and something else. Something I could not quite make out. Then Adam said, "Dude, come here." He pointed to a corner of the cabin. On the wall, carved into the wood, were tally marks. Dozens of them, each one carefully scratched into the timber, and above them, written in black marker, were 3 words: "Stay off ridge." Before I could even react, we heard a sound outside, one like something stepping on dry twigs. We froze. Then it happened again. Crack, crunch. Adam slowly moved to the window and looked out. His face went pale. He whispered, "Someone's out there." I walked over and peeked through the gap in the boards. Standing about 30 feet from the cabin was a man. He was tall, maybe 6'4", wearing a brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat. His face was hard to see through the shadows, but I could make out a faint grin. He was holding something in his hand. Something long. It looked like an axe handle. He did not move. He just stared at the cabin. Adam whispered, "Let's get out of here." We backed away from the window and grabbed our packs. But before we could leave through the door, it slammed shut. We both jumped back. Someone was outside. We heard heavy footsteps circling the cabin, then silence. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Adam whispered, "There's a back window, go." I climbed onto the counter, pushed the window frame open, and slipped through. Adam followed right after. We hit the ground running. Branches whipped against our faces as we sprinted through the forest, heading in the direction of the trail. Behind us, I could hear movement and someone crashing through the brush fast. We did not stop. Not once. After what felt like forever, we burst out onto the main trail again, gasping for breath. The forest was dead silent again. No footsteps, no sound. We hiked straight back to the car. When we finally reached the parking lot, there was no one else there. We jumped in, locked the doors, and drove. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 minutes. Then Adam looked at me and said quietly, "That guy, he was not hiking. He was waiting." We called the local ranger station when we got home. They said there used to be a small logging camp up there decades ago, and that the old cabin had belonged to a man who went missing in 1979. They never found him. When Adam described the man we saw, tall, brown coat, wide-brimmed hat, the ranger went quiet. He said, "People have reported seeing someone like that near Eagle Peak for years, but we've never confirmed anything. I do not know what we saw that day. Maybe it was a living person, maybe not, but I do know one thing. I will never hike that trail again. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still see that cabin, the marks on the wall, and the message carved deep into the wood, 'Stay off ridge.'" Story 3. The Disappearance at Cold Creek Trail. There are places in this world that feel wrong, not haunted, not cursed, just off. Places where silence feels heavier, where your instincts tell you to turn around. For me, that place was Cold Creek Trail. It was late October of 2021 when I went there. The trees had already turned shades of orange and red, and the mornings carried that sharp, cold air that bites your lungs. I had been hiking for years, mostly alone. I liked the solitude. Cold Creek was in northern Washington, near a small town called Bernstead, a forgotten town with only one diner, one gas station, and people who did not smile much. The trail was known to be quiet and underused. Perfect, I thought. Before I left, I stopped at the gas station to grab some supplies. The old man at the counter looked at my pack and asked where I was headed. "Cold Creek," I said. He frowned. That trail's closed this time of year. I told him the map showed it was open. He just stared at me for a moment, then said map's old, and that was it. I laughed it off, bought my stuff, and drove to the trailhead. When I got there, the parking lot was empty, not unusual for that season, but the sign at the entrance had been covered in dirt and moss. The wooden post looked like it had been repaired several times. The first few miles were beautiful. Tall pines, the sound of water trickling somewhere nearby, the crunch of dead leaves beneath my boots. I stopped once to drink and noticed a faint humming noise in the distance. At first I thought it was the wind moving through the trees, but it was rhythmic, almost mechanical, like a generator. That was odd. There were no cabins or facilities anywhere near Cold Creek. Still, I ignored it and kept going. By the 4th mile, the trail narrowed into a steep incline. The temperature dropped sharply. My breath came out in visible clouds. That's when I started seeing things. At first it was small, a rope tied between 2 trees frayed at both ends. Then an old boot half buried in mud. Then a backpack, torn open with papers scattered around it. The papers were too damp to read, but one page had something drawn on it, a simple circle with an X through it. It looked like a marker, or maybe a warning. I told myself it was just litter from a careless camper, but as I kept walking I began to feel it again, that subtle, creeping sense that I was not alone. Every few minutes I heard a faint snap of a branch somewhere behind me. I would stop, listen, and it would stop too. After a while I started talking out loud, partly to calm myself, partly to convince whoever or whatever was there that I was not afraid. It did not help. At around 5 p.m. the light began to fade. I decided to set up camp near a stream just off the trail. The area was quiet except for the sound of running water. As night fell, I built a small fire and ate. The forest looked different now, darker, thicker, like it was closing in around me. Then around 9 p.m. I heard it again. That humming noise. Only this time it was much closer. It was low, steady, and coming from somewhere down the creek. I grabbed my flashlight and walked a few feet toward the sound. The beam cut through the mist rising from the water, revealing branches, rocks, and nothing else, but the humming kept going. Curious, I followed it, maybe 200 feet, until I saw something strange on the opposite bank, a light. It was small and yellow, flickering faintly through the trees. At first I thought it was another camper, but then it moved slowly, side to side. I shouted, "Hello?" The light froze. Then just as suddenly it went out. I stood there for a minute waiting to see if it would come back. It did not. When I turned to walk back to my camp, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. My footprints were gone. The mud along the creek where I had walked was smooth, untouched. I tried to laugh it off, blaming the mist and bad lighting, and hurried back. But when I reached my tent, the fire was out, and the zipper on the tent door was open. I stopped cold. I was sure I had zipped it shut. I slowly looked inside. My sleeping bag was there, my food, my flashlight batteries, but my knife, the one I kept right beside the sleeping bag, was missing. I checked every pocket of my pack. Nothing. At that point, I decided to pack up and leave. I did not care how dark it was. I could not spend the night there. I turned on my flashlight and started back toward the trail. The beam flickered once, then twice before steadying again. After about 10 minutes, I started seeing faint lights between the trees. Not one, but several, like lanterns or flashlights. They were spread out, moving slowly through the forest. I crouched down behind a tree, my heart pounding. The lights moved silently. No footsteps, no voices, just that same low humming. One of the lights stopped near a tree about 50 feet from me. For a second, it glowed brighter, and then I saw the outline of a person holding it. Tall, thin, wearing a hood or mask. The humming grew louder, almost vibrating through the ground. I do not remember how long I stayed crouched there, barely breathing. But eventually the lights started moving again, away from me this time, fading into the woods. When they were gone, I ran. I do not think I have ever moved that fast in my life. Branches cut my face, roots tripped me, but I kept going until I finally saw the reflection of my car's headlights in the distance. When I reached it, I jumped inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. But just as I was about to drive off, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. Across the parking lot on the edge of the woods stood a figure, a tall shape, still and dark, and hanging from one of the trees above him was a small lantern, swinging slowly side to side. I drove until I hit the highway and did not stop until I reached a motel 2 towns away. When I told the motel clerk where I had come from, he looked at me like he had heard it before. He said quietly, "You're lucky. A kid went missing up there last fall. Search teams found his camp, but not him." I could not sleep that night. I kept seeing those lights, that humming, that empty tent. The next morning, I called the local ranger station and reported everything. They said Cold Creek had been officially closed since 2018 after multiple disappearances, but maps and GPS systems still showed it open. I never went back. But sometimes late at night when the wind outside my apartment makes that low, steady whine, I think about that sound near the creek, and I wonder how many people followed it, thinking it was something harmless, only to find themselves surrounded by those flickering lights. Thank you all for listening to tonight's stories. If you ever go hiking, remember, nature hides a lot more than just beauty. Stay safe out there, and if you have a true horror story of your own, share it in the comments below. You never know. Your story might be next.